Hey, how we doing? So I want to take a minute, sit down, and address some questions that I'm getting about our meat rabbits. I had to print these out. So there's about 13, 14 questions here. They're not by any means all the questions, but they tend to be the most frequently asked questions, much to my surprise. Some of these are actually pretty good questions. So I thought I'd sit down and address some of these questions pertaining to our meat rabbits. Before I do that though, I would like to, when I just like to talk about meat rabbits for just a moment. A lot of times people look at you like, dude's crazy, man. He's eating rabbits, they're eating pets. Well, the fact of the matter is that the United States is one of the few countries that still considers a rabbit a pet versus a protein source. Many other countries all around the world, when you talk about rabbit is a protein source. There's commercial facilities that grow rabbit much like we do chicken in the United States. See, we don't raise chicken as pets. Well, some people have pet chickens, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. You do you. But as we commercially grow chickens to consume as Americans all across the world, they commercially grow rabbit to consume. It's a protein source. Italy alone, probably, let's see, what was it? Italy serves over 200 million pounds of rabbit a year, and China produces probably over half of the world's rabbit meat. So like it or hate it, it is what it is. So I know I get kind of some sideways stares sometimes, and people think I'm a nice little cute little fur bunnies, and they are, don't get me wrong, but we don't raise pets, we raise meat rabbits. So it is what it is. So now that I ran down that rabbit hole, pun intended, let's get to these questions, all right? So I was going to start off and talk about my setup but I'll wait on that because a couple of these questions pertain to our setup, and there's no sense in repeating that. So let's jump to this question. How much space does New Zealand whites actually need? Well, for those that don't know, like I said, I raise New Zealand white rabbits. Any rabbit really for that matter. It doesn't need a lot of space. I would say probably for an adult rabbit, a 36 by 30 cage is plenty big enough. It depends on what you're doing. We have grow out cages that might be a little bit bigger because, excuse me, because I'll have 8, 10, 12 rabbits in there growing up to be about 5 pounds a piece, and even then you don't need a lot of space. So they don't take up a lot of space at all. So good question, thanks. So number 2 was, why did you choose the breed that you're raising over other breeds? Now that's a good question, and that's something to really look into if it's something you're wanting to get into, because I chose New Zealand white rabbits, and there's other colors. I raise New Zealand whites. There's other colors of the New Zealand rabbits, but I chose New Zealand white because for many reasons. Back when I started raising rabbits, or prior to starting raising rabbits, I did a lot of research on the rabbits, which is what I would suggest anybody does. Do your due diligence before you just don't jump in. Do some research and figure it out. So what I learned was that several things. One, the New Zealand white has a high meat to bone ratio, meaning it's a very lean protein, and it's got a lot more meat than bone, and it's got a very high feed to meat rate conversion, meaning it doesn't cost a lot of feed to get to where you want to harvest that animal. There can be a plateau there, and you can get to where you're spending more money on feed, but we'll talk about that. So they're quiet, they don't smell, contrary to what people think. You can have a meat rabbit set up in your backyard in an urban setting and nobody would ever know, hands down. So those are some of the reasons that I chose the New Zealand whites. Excuse me. So, but again, I suggest that everybody does their own due diligence, do your own research, see what works for you. So the next question, why did the, oh sorry, I just answered that. So next question is, how fast do they grow to butcher weight? Well, that's going to depend on where you butcher at. For me personally, I have a nice little sweet spot, and that's between 5 and 7 pounds, which averages out to between 8 and 10 weeks. Now the reason I go 5 pounds is because once that 5-pound rabbit is dressed, meaning you lose the feet, the head, the organs, it's clean, you end up with about 2.5 to 3 pounds of packaged meat. Okay, now that's very lean protein meat too. It's not a bunch of fat and gristle. Okay, so in my opinion, that's a pretty good amount of weight versus the feed that I feed. It only takes 8 to 10 weeks to get there. So you got to find out what works for you. But that's, for me, that's the sweet spot. 8 to 10 weeks, 5 pounds, 5 to 7 pounds I harvest. So, you know, it takes about 8 to 10 weeks to answer your question in short. Okay, so the next question contained about, you know, how much meat you're going to get from the rabbit. I think I just talked about that a little bit. So like I said, I harvest them, I raise them up to about 5 to 7 pounds, which is 8 to 10 weeks, and then we harvest them. And the reason for that is because I get from between 2.5 to 3, sometimes 3.5 pounds per rabbit packaged, clean, and ready to go. So, what do you feed them? I keep things simple. I feed them a very high protein pellet. Occasionally I give them a little alfalfa hay. I try not to mix it up too much because I like to keep their diet consistent. So a very good high protein pellet, fresh clean water at all times. Simple. I do know some people, you know, they give them, and don't get me wrong, sometimes I'll feed them the sweet potato leaves and things like that out of the garden, but that's not consistent. Those are just like small little treats here and there, because rabbits, believe it or not, they got a very peculiar digestive system, and you know, you don't want to interrupt that digestive system, and they get sick, you start having problems. So just keep things really simple. Do they need bedding, and what type of solid flooring do I put into my hutch? Do they need bedding, or what type of solid flooring do I need? Okay, so you could use bedding. I personally do not, and there's a couple reasons I'll get into why I don't. I raise on suspended cages, wire cages suspended, so everything falls to the ground. We'll get into that. If you were going to use any type of bedding, I would use hay, but I really wouldn't suggest doing that because, you know, you want to keep things as clean as possible. I mean, absolutely as clean and sanitary as possible. And if rabbits are manuring and urinating on that hay, and then they're tromping in it, you know, you'll see rabbits like that. Their little paws will be yellow and stuff. Well, that's from them, you know, crawling around their own urine. So, I mean, do you want to crawl around your own urine? So I don't use anything for bedding. So the one exception would be occasionally I do put hay in a nesting box, and that's going to depend on the weather, the time of the year, and the mother. I will occasionally put hay in the nesting box, but we'll get to that. So, and as far as the flooring, again, I use a suspended wire cage with a wire bottom. Now that said, you want to make sure you're using a right type of wire bottom for your cage, because if you don't, you can really hurt your rabbit's feet. You don't want to use anything like chicken wire. You don't want to use the 2x2 hardware cloth. You know, I use 1/4x1. You know, there's small holes. You want the holes small enough for the manure to fall through, but yet, big enough for the manure to fall through, but small enough where it's not going to hurt it's going to evenly distribute the animal's weight. So that's that. Okay, so we talked about what we fed them. We talked about the flooring. What do you do with the manure and droppings left over from your leftovers? It sound like turkey droppings. What are you going to do with it? Sorry. So what are you going to do with your droppings? All right, well, that is where rabbits kind of give you the icing on the cake, because rabbit manure is what's considered a cold manure. There's a few other animals, I believe alpaca, I don't know. Anyhow, rabbits manure is high in phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium, but it's a cold manure. What that means is, unlike chicken, rabbit manure, chicken, horse, and cow manure, they heat up, and you can't throw those directly on your plants, because if you do, you're going to destroy your plants. So they got to go through the thermal process of heating up, breaking down, composting, and then you can use them. Rabbit manure is not like that. I can scoop it right out of the cage, right off the ground, throw it directly in a garden bed, and it's beneficial to my plants. I even put it out on my lawn. So there's many things you can do with it. You don't just let it pile up. Gardeners will pay you for sacks of rabbit food. Now, you're not going to make a lot of money off of it, but you might make up enough money to offset your feed costs. Something to think about. So people will pay for rabbit manure because they know how valuable it is. So that's what you do with it. How often do you breed them? Well, you can breed rabbits as often as aggressive you want. That's where the saying bred like rabbits comes from. I use much like other rabbit breeders, we use a controlled breeding process. It's on a 2-week rotation. I do what I call perpetual harvest. You start with 2 does, 1 buck. That's all you need to really get started. You can feed a family for a year. So what I do, I take that first doe, I breed her. 2 weeks later, I'll breed that second doe. So that first doe, while she's weaning her kids or babies, the second doe is going into labor and she's having her kids. Okay, 2 weeks later, you go back to the first doe. Her babies now are already out in the grow out pen. They're ready. They're fryers. They're ready to be harvested. She's starting to have her second litter, and you just rotate like that. Now, what I do is I'll take siblings from doe A and doe B, say like a buck from doe A and a doe from doe B, and that's my new breeding pair. Okay, that's how we get into our perpetual harvest, and we end up harvesting about 12 pounds of meat a week, every week, once it's in full cycle. Okay, so like I said, in short, to answer your question, you could breed them as much as you want. You could breed them as less as you want, but I would recommend giving them a week or 2 weeks of rest in between breeding. It's just healthier on the animal, in my opinion. So that answers your breeding, and I shared a little bit about our breeding strategy. How long does it take for a pregnancy? How long does it take? Okay, so I think you're asking, yeah, how long does it take for a pregnancy? All right, so it takes about 31 days from the time, on average, 31 days from time the doe has been bred. Sometimes it's 28 days, sometimes it's 38 days, but on average, about 31 days, okay? Just in there. So it takes the 31 days for them to be, to have their babies. The babies are with their mama for about 6 weeks, and then they're ready for harvesting in 8 to 10 weeks. So you can kind of do the math there. You can sit down and figure that out and figure out your own perpetual harvesting system very easily and very quickly. So that talks about how often you breed them. I talked about our breeding system. And sorry I'm going into a little bit more detail on some of these questions. I know I'm probably saying more than what you asked, but it is what it is. So how well do they handle the heat? I live in Arizona, and I'm wondering what I need to do with my hutch for the heat. Okay. So that's actually a good question, and good for you for asking that and doing your research on that, because heat is an enemy. They cannot handle the heat very well. They can handle the cold very well, but heat, in fact, one of my mistakes as a years ago, when I started raising rabbits, I was raising in a garage, and we had a very cold winter, and overnight I thought, well, I'm going to put a heater out there, and I'm going to keep the babies warm, and unfortunately, because of that, I lost them. I lost the babies. So, but yeah, heat, they don't like heat. There's things you could do. You could put in frozen water bottles. You could put in a misting system. You could put in fans. I wouldn't suggest having the air of the fans blowing directly on the rabbits, but you do want air circulating. Definitely keep them in the shade. There's just some things you could do to help with if you're in a very hot environment. Just do your research and due diligence. And in fact, if you reach out to someone in your local area, I'm sure you're going to find someone that's successfully raising meat rabbits. If not in your area, very close by in the same environment. So they ought to be able to help you out on that. So yeah, heat's a big killer for rabbits. They don't like the heat very well. What do you do? What do you put in a nest box, and how do I go about making or getting a nest box? Okay, nest box. What we're referring to there is when on about day 28, when after the rabbit's been bred, about 28 days later, we put a nest box in. Basically, all it is for me, it's just a wooden box that fits into my cage that the mother can jump in and make her nest in. Thus, nesting box. So that's all it is. They make metal ones, they make galvanized ones. Some people make theirs out of wire and make them out of wood. Wood is probably your best thing, but if you're going to use wood, make your own. Make it out of a clean, untreated pine wood. Don't use treated wood because they will chew on them, and any chemicals in that wood, can harm the rabbits. Anything you put in your cages, make sure it's untreated. So that's all it is, a nesting box. And as far as the nesting box, I might put a little hay in there depending on the type of the time of the year, depending on the weather we're having. And also depending on the mother. Some newer mothers, they won't pull enough fur. The doe, when she knows she's going in labor, she'll pull the fur and make a nest. Some of the new mothers, they're newer, they may not necessarily pull enough fur, and they may not necessarily pull fur at all. So you want to put a little hay in there to help with that. What's the biggest mistake beginners make? Well, I shared a few of them that I made, but I think probably the biggest mistakes any beginner is going to make is overfeeding, not keeping the air circulating, not keeping the areas clean and sanitized. Cleanliness and sanitation is probably one of the biggest ones. So if you keep your cages clean, you keep the area clean and sanitized, and air circulation, keep your rabbits dry. They do not like to be wet. They will get sick, and you can cause them to die. So clean, dry, and sanitize. Air movement. Do your rabbits smell? I've heard that they smell really bad. That's not true. Well, let me back that up a minute. They can smell if you're lazy. If you're raising rabbits, for example, in cages with trays that catch all the droppings and you don't empty and clean those cages, then naturally that's going to smell. But if, in my opinion, and I'm going to hurt your feelings here, but in my opinion, if you're that lazy of a person, you don't need to be raising any type of animal for any reason in the first place. So I'm just saying. But other than that situation, no, they don't stink at all. There's absolutely no smell. I don't have ammonia's buildup. I don't, the poop doesn't smell, none of that. So no, they don't smell. Unless you're a lazy person, I guess. How much does it cost to raise them? Raising rabbits is pretty, you'd be surprised at how affordable it is. Your biggest cost in raising rabbits is going to be your setup. And even then, it's not a lot. And there's things you can do to mitigate those costs, but it just depends on, I mean, you could have the most pimped out setup you want, and you're going to spend a lot of money on it. So, kind of use a little common sense there. But other than your setup and your initial costs, your setup and supplies, it's going to be feed costs, and it's not that much. I get a 50-pound bag of high protein pellets. I think it's like $15. I could probably get it cheaper somewhere else, but I just buy it out of convenience for me because it's really, really close. And that'll last me quite a while. So it's not very expensive at all. And the trade-off, once you get going, the trade-off, think about it this way. How much does it cost you to buy, say, 4 pounds of chicken at the store? Now you take that 4 pounds of chicken and you buy that every single day at the store, every single day over a week. Add it up, and then you tell me how much that you paid for that, and you tell me how cheap the rabbit's going to be for you to raise. I guarantee you spent less money in feed than you did in buying chicken at that store. How do you keep them calm and handling? I'm not a veterinarian, and I'm not a master rabbit handler. I'll just tell you how I do it. When I reach into a cage, I grab her by the nape of the neck, pull her out, like you would a puppy or anything else, and then kind of cradle them, calm them down, okay? You do want to secure them hind legs, because let me tell you, them suckers will mess you up. They get the kicking, them claws are going to tear you up. So, and if you're handling any amount of time, you're going to get scratched. It is what it is. And I will tell you something else about rabbits. And I don't know if this is the case about all rabbits, but I know with my New Zealand whites, their temperament, they sense how you're feeling. So like if you're scared, if you're reaching in and you're all scared, and they sense that, and that tenses them up and stresses them out. So if you just calmly approach the rabbit and calmly handle the rabbits, they're going to stay calm. So my opinion, my experience. So yeah, that was, believe it or not, we've already went through 13 of these questions. So number 14 is, when should you breed them for the first time? That's a good question. That's something that's often overlooked, because you don't want to breed them too young. I would say your does 5 to 6 months, and your bucks probably around 5 to 6 months, probably around 6 month mark. 6 months is a really good breeding age. You don't want to go them too young, because you can hurt the does, and the bucks kind of get a little aggressive and not really know what they're doing. So around the 6 month mark is a good time to start breeding. This question here, this question is funny. Every time I see it, I kind of laugh, because People always want to know, what does meat rabbit taste like? Well, it's kind of an oxymoron here, but it tastes like chicken. And I know. If we don't know what something tastes like, we just say it tastes like chicken. That's just the way it is. But believe it or not, it's very, very similar to a chicken meat. It's white meat. It's high protein meat. These aren't your everyday wild rabbits that Grandpa went out to the woods and cornfields and hunted. It doesn't taste gamey. It doesn't have anything like that. Now, I will tell you, I've eaten wild rabbit and I've eaten our raised rabbit, and there is a taste distinguished there. A lot of people, when they think of, if they've had rabbit in the past, they've had wild rabbit. So they decide for themselves, oh, I don't like that. It tastes like turtle, or, it's gamey. I don't like it. But our meat rabbits, when they're raised the way we raise them, I don't know what it is, but the meat, it does not taste gamey at all. It's like I said, if I had to compare it to anything, it really would be a chicken. It tastes just like the chicken white meat. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I hope I answered these questions. I hope I did some justice there. Like I said, I'm not a know-all, be-all. I'm just an average dude out here, just like the rest of y'all. I'm not trying to, be a guru or anything like that. But these questions, much to my surprise, I've been getting these questions a lot. So I thought I'd sit down and ask these questions a little bit. We'll go over my setup. Like I promised you, we stick to it. Stick with me till the end. We'll go over the. We'll do a walk around my little setup. I'll briefly show that to you. Maybe give you some inspiration to set up your own. If you raise meat rabbits, if you're thinking about getting into meat rabbits, if you do any homesteading, whether it be gardening, raising animals. Now, we don't raise chicken, but we're interested in chicken. In fact, we might be raising some quail soon. But we'll get into that another time. But let us know in the comments below your thoughts. What do you want to do? What do you want to know? And if this is a good video, if you don't think it's a good video, let me know. Hey, you know what? Like I said, I'm just an average dude out here trying to make it. So if you don't think it's good, or you have better suggestions, let me know, because I don't know it all. Hopefully what I do know, I can spread on to others and help you. But let's all learn together. Like, comment, share. Most importantly, share. And our next video, I'm going to get into our raised beds. You're not going to want to miss that. So till then, see you next time.